Fat has spent decades as the most misunderstood macronutrient in nutrition. The low-fat craze swept through the 1990s and left an entire generation convinced that eating fat made you fat, and that the goal of healthy eating was to minimize it as much as possible. That thinking shaped decades of food labeling, product development, and dietary advice. And while protein has recently had its mainstream moment, and carbohydrates have cycled in and out of favor depending on which diet is trending, fat has quietly faded into the background without ever getting the honest reappraisal it deserves. Today, I want to walk you through exactly what happens to your body when you consistently eat too little fat, how to think about the different types of fat and which ones actually matter, and the specific daily number that nutrition professionals use as the minimum threshold for keeping your body running properly. Let me start with why fat is not optional. Fat is classified as an essential nutrient, which in nutrition science means something specific. It means your body cannot manufacture it in adequate amounts on its own and must obtain it from food. But the essentialness of fat goes further than just fatty acids. Fat is the vehicle through which your body absorbs and uses the fat-soluble vitamins, which are vitamins A, D, E, and K. These 4 vitamins cannot be absorbed through the gut without dietary fat present. If you eat a meal containing vitamin D-rich salmon but pair it with an ultra-low-fat meal, you absorb significantly less of that vitamin D than you would have if the meal contained fat. This is also why you are generally told to take fat-soluble vitamin supplements with food rather than on an empty stomach. The fat in the meal is doing the absorptive work. Cut the fat too low, and you open the door to deficiencies in all 4 of these vitamins, regardless of how much of them you are consuming in food or supplements. The hormonal effects of chronically low-fat intake are less well known but equally significant. Testosterone and estrogen both rely on dietary fat for their production. This applies to everyone, not just men. Men still need estrogen in appropriate amounts, and women need testosterone. When fat intake drops consistently below what the body needs, the entire hormonal system can be disrupted. In the long run, an extremely low-fat diet can cause the kind of hormonal imbalance that affects energy, mood, reproductive function, and a long list of other physiological processes that most people never connect to what they are eating. Skin is another area where the consequences of insufficient fat show up clearly and visibly. Fat is an important component of skin cell membranes, and your body sheds between 30,000 and 40,000 old skin cells every single day. The fat you eat helps maintain the skin barrier and locks in moisture from the inside out. When dietary fat is too low, skin cells do not get the structural support they need, and the result is chronic dryness, reduced elasticity, and a compromised barrier that struggles to retain moisture, regardless of how much you spend on topical products. Nourishing your skin from the inside through adequate dietary fat is something no amount of skincare can fully replace. So fat clearly matters, but not all fat functions the same way in the body, and understanding the categories is what allows you to make genuinely useful choices rather than just eating more fat indiscriminately. The first category is monounsaturated fat, which is widely considered the gold standard of dietary fat. Found in olive oil, avocados, and most nuts, monounsaturated fats support heart health by raising HDL cholesterol, which is the protective kind, while simultaneously lowering LDL cholesterol, which is the kind associated with cardiovascular risk. These are the fats most closely associated with the longevity benefits seen in Mediterranean-style eating patterns. If you're going to anchor the bulk of your fat intake around one category, monounsaturated sources are the clearest and most consistent choice, supported by nutrition science. The second category is polyunsaturated fat, which includes the omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. These are classified as essential fats in the strictest sense. Your body cannot produce them at all and must get them entirely from food. Omega-3 fatty acids in particular, found primarily in fatty fish like salmon and sardines, play a critical role in reducing systemic inflammation, supporting brain function, and promoting cardiovascular health. These are among the most studied nutrients in the field of nutrition, and the evidence for their anti-inflammatory and brain protective effects is strong and consistent. If you do not eat fatty fish regularly, An omega-3 fish oil supplement is worth considering specifically to cover this category because the consequences of omega-3 deficiency are real and the food sources are limited compared to other fats. The third category is saturated fat, which remains the most controversial. Found primarily in animal products including meat, butter, and dairy, saturated fat was treated for decades as a primary driver of heart disease. More recent research has complicated that picture somewhat, suggesting the relationship is more nuanced, particularly when it comes to whole food sources like full-fat dairy. However, the nuance does not mean saturated fat is harmless or that you can eat it freely without consequences. Most major health organizations still recommend keeping saturated fat intake moderate, ideally below 10% of your total daily calories. The updated understanding is that saturated fat from whole food sources may be less damaging than previously thought, but that does not make it neutral. And the advice to replace saturated fat with monounsaturated and polyunsaturated sources is still well supported. Now let me give you the practical number that answers the most important question. How much fat do you actually need? A practical starting point used by many nutrition professionals is 0.3 grams of fat per pound of body weight per day. For someone who weighs 175 pounds, that works out to roughly 52 grams of fat per day. This is enough to support hormone production, vitamin absorption, and brain function without overcomplicating your diet. Think of this number as your floor, not your target. Going consistently below it is where physiological problems begin to emerge. 1 or 2 days below it is not a concern. It is the consistent, long-term pattern of under-consuming fat that causes the vitamin deficiencies, hormonal disruption, and skin issues described earlier. As a percentage of total daily calories, the general recommendation is that 20 to 35% of your calories come from fat. On a 2,000-calorie diet, that translates to approximately 44 to 78 grams per day. Where you fall within that range depends on your personal goals, your body composition, and how you respond to different dietary approaches. The majority of your fat intake within that range should come from a blend of monounsaturated and polyunsaturated sources, with saturated fat kept at the lower end of your total. One practical note worth mentioning: fat is the most calorie-dense macronutrient at 9 calories per gram compared to 4 calories per gram for both protein and carbohydrates. This means that portion awareness matters. A small handful of nuts contains significantly more calories than an equivalent volume of most other foods. Using a food scale or measuring cups for higher fat foods like nuts, nut butters, oils, and avocado helps you hit your daily fat target without accidentally overshooting your overall calorie goals. This is not about restriction. It is about precision in a category where it is easy to underestimate. The broader reframe that is worth carrying out of this video is a simple one. Fat is not a dietary villain to be minimized. It is an essential nutrient that your body depends on for hormone production, vitamin absorption, healthy skin, brain function, and cardiovascular health. The goal is not to eat less of it across the board, but to eat the right kinds consistently. Anchor your intake around monounsaturated and polyunsaturated sources. Keep saturated fat moderate. Avoid the processed trans fats found in many packaged foods, and make sure you are consistently hitting the daily minimum your body needs to function properly. The low-fat era did a lot of damage to how people think about this macronutrient, and undoing that damage starts with understanding what fat actually does inside your body, and why cutting it below the threshold is not a shortcut to better health, but a path toward a specific set of physiological problems that many people are already experiencing without knowing the cause. If this gave you a clearer picture of a nutrient that nutrition culture has consistently gotten wrong, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Every week I cover exactly this kind of practical nutrition information that cuts through the noise and gives you something you can actually use. Share this with someone who is still afraid of fat because of advice they got 30 years ago. The science has moved on.